Welcome to Faultline Turbo Tremors, a shorter showcase for the bigger issues. I'm Crystal Mech, the host with the most who sure loves his toast. Yeah, I know, it's kind of early for me to be branching off of the mainline series, but I think this would be an easier way for me to get content onto the show and YouTube in quicker bursts. Especially with all the crap I'm gonna have to do in the near future. You know, college and whatnot. As you could probably tell, Turbo Tremors is going to take the core concept of Faultline and shrink it down a tad bit. Rather than discussing a game's 3 biggest issues, I'm just going to be discussing one large blemish instead. The criteria for games being featured on this show is still going to be relatively similar, games that are generally considered decent at the very least. And rest assured, regular Faultline videos are still going to be in the pipeline, but I'm just creating this show with the intent to cover indie games and games that I feel really only have one major flaw, hopefully in a shorter time span. So the first game that's up on our slightly smaller chopping block today is Enter the Gungeon. Released in April of last year as of this recording, Enter the Gungeon is a miraculous roguelite bullet hell shooter hybrid produced by Devolver Digital and built by Dodge Roll Entertainment. This game is super challenging and addicting, which is pretty much on par for any roguelite game, and hot damn, it has some pretty pixels. There is some fantastic artwork on display here, and almost every corner of this game fits its weaponized motif. I've logged hundreds of hours in this game, and it remains one of the few games in my collection on Steam that I've obtained every single achievement for. But man, let me tell you, in the time that I spent slaving away at this game, there was one particular issue that made me suffer time after time again. And I'm not necessarily talking about the usual suspects of roguelike design here. Stuff like randomized pickup drops after clearing rooms, tanky bosses, lack of player guidance, and so on and so forth. Honestly, most of these issues are commonplace in the genre at this point and should be expected in these types of titles. No. The big issue I'm going to be talking about today is particularly unique to Enter the Gungeon. And while its market counterparts Binding of Isaac and Nuclear Throne share this issue to a slight degree, Gungeon exacerbates it to frankly outrageous levels. So in comparison to similar games that preceded it, such as Nuclear Throne and the Binding of Isaac like I mentioned before, Enter the Gungeon peaks a tiny bit higher on the sliding scale of shit coming at you. Some of the later bosses can easily take up so much screen real estate with bullets that it nearly reaches Toho levels of insanity. Whatever. Most of the time this really isn't an issue though, because the controls are tight enough to accommodate for this. If you end up getting pelted with a stray projectile, there was at least a slim chance that you could have avoided it if you knew what you were doing. And most of the time, bosses and enemies have attack patterns that are recognizable and countered in a straightforward manner. Keywords most of the time. This leads to
Enter the Gungeon's biggest fault: off-screen obstruction.
There are just way too many points in Enter the Gungeon where some kind of mook or obstacle hidden just out of view of my character ends up blindsiding me and getting a free hit in. It seems like a small issue, but it's more of a common problem than you might think. And it's mostly due to Enter the Gungeon's elaborate and expansive room design and awkward camera control. I think a large reason that the initial Binding of Isaac was very skittish on the inclusion of rooms that were larger than the classic Zelda-like chambers was due to the fact that the game camera wouldn't be able to encapsulate the entire room. As it was, every enemy and hazard was visible the moment you entered the room. This made you immediately aware of all the things trying to kill you, and sure, it wasn't always possible to easily avoid or dodge them due to occasionally crummy room layouts being generated, but this guaranteed that you were almost never bum rushed from the ether space by a demon face out of nowhere. Unfortunately, its pixelized remake Rebirth caved into the pressure and included larger room dimensions. This gave way to more room layout possibilities, sure, but consequentially it made the game quite a bit more challenging for all the wrong reasons. Since the camera tended to shift slightly in the direction that your character was facing, this made you susceptible to attacks from foes behind you. This makes some of the challenge modes, most notably Greed mode, more difficult in a very artificial and cheap manner. But even then, you at least had some leeway because the camera shifted to whatever direction you were facing, and it did so rather quickly so you wouldn't be surprised as often. Now take this problem, dial it up to a ludicrous level with a camera that practically sinks your character towards the edge of the window whenever you look in a direction, and further amplify the anguish with room layouts that absolutely dwarf the Binding of Isaac and most other roguelites in comparison. The difference here, it's pretty much night and day. It can turn even the best Gungeon runs into a horrific luck-based ordeal. Perhaps it wouldn't be such a huge issue, but there are countless amounts of enemies in Enter the Gungeon whose attacks really come at you quick. Some enemies can lead their shots, others have spread attacks that cover a lot more ground, and some attacks are practically just hit scan and lock onto your character without much warning. It's hard enough trying to survive most of these encounters untouched, but with the advantage of being concealed by the edges of the screen, it makes even the weakest enemies practically impossible to predict and evade. There are some enemies that telegraph their presence, such as the sniper bulletkin projecting a visible laser sight. But then you have enemies like the cubes later on, which dart into you rapidly out of practically nowhere. These guys literally require split-second reflexes to dodge. They're huge, and some of them are invincible for the duration of the room. And not knowing where half of these jerk-offs are coming from right before they plow into you instantly for half a heart of damage is just infuriating and immensely despicable. The stupid thing is there is a really easy fix for this. All you would have to do is add some kind of reticle or arrow to the edge of the screen that shows you the approximate location of your enemy. Hell, even a blip on your mini-map would work. But no, you don't get anything. And the really stupid thing is there technically is one programmed into the game already, but it isn't so much used for keeping track of where your enemies are, it's just a pointer to the last enemy you need to finish off in the room. It's basically just the game telling you, "Hey dipshit, he's over here!" instead of just giving you that kind of indicator right away, which would be infinitely more helpful. And yeah, believe me, this problem absolutely persists into many of the game's boss fights. Most are straightforward enough, but the ones that cause the most aggravation are typically the ones that can spawn minions off screen while you're distracted with all the other shit you have to avoid. In particular, I speak of 3 of the most hated bosses in the entire game: Amoconda, the High Priest, and Dreadnought. All 3 of these bosses are cheap as hell and practically require straight dumb luck in order to avoid getting hit to obtain the Master Realm, an item necessary to unlock all of the shortcuts. And the main reason for this is because a lot of their worst hazards aren't visibly shown on screen all the time. Amoconda not only has extremely random and unpredictable attack patterns shooting out of every appendage on its body while it rapidly darts around the boss arena, but it also has a tendency to spawn in these tumor-looking bulbs that plant themselves firmly on the floor, fire shots at you while you're distracted, and provide defensive and healing buffs to the boss when he consumes them. You can destroy them, sure, but it takes some serious firepower, and with the fact that they can plop down at any time in any of the dirt patches in the room, you won't even know if one has spawned in most of the time because you're too preoccupied with the crazy bullet patterns. The High Priest doesn't necessarily spawn in minions or anything, but his boss fight still has this issue because the bullets are coming out of the walls. As if you didn't have enough shit to worry about during this boss fight. Good grief. There's literally no explanation, excuse, or anything for this. They just sort of appear and drift around the room. There's absolutely no way to predict these, and they make it nearly impossible to stay in one area of the boss room for too long. Oh yeah, and they spawn off screen. Again, my awareness of all the hazards I have to avoid is deliberately obstructed in a cheap and ridiculous way. But Dreadnought though. Just fucking try. This boss is literally the worst, not just because he makes you fucking swim through a raging tide of bullets, not just because he can eradicate what little cover you have by obliterating the wall pillars around the room, not just because some of his attacks are literally unavoidable if you find yourself caught in a bad spot in the room. No, the real reason this fight is an absolute cock in the ass is because sometimes he can shoot bullets that spawn minions with machine guns
Off screen behind you!
I fucking guarantee if you haven't played this game and you fight this thing for the first time, one of these motherfuckers is gonna nail you in the back of the head no matter how hard you try to avoid them, because again, you don't know when or where these bastards are gonna show up, all because of spotty room design and cheap difficulty that makes the game infinitely more frustrating than it needs to be. Do I still recommend playing this game? Oh hell yeah, it's a blast. Much like Isaac, there is a staggering amount of shit to unlock and use, so every playthrough feels like an accomplishment, even if you end up dying early. Regardless of whether or not you're a casual roguelike aficionado, you're bound to have a great time with Gungeon if you even remotely enjoyed Isaac or Nuclear Throne. Just be prepared for those many moments where you're going to be caught off guard. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I'm going to be taking a little bit of time off to spend some time with my folks and get ready for school, so unfortunately the next video and the SpongeBob movie game stream probably won't be until at least a week and a half from now. I sincerely apologize in advance, and I'll get back to making content as soon as I can. Until then, I'm Crystal Mech, and if you're gonna do drugs, stay away from that meth.